Welcome back. In this segment of this course, we want to give you a very practical, tangible thing that you ought to be doing as you are making disciples, and that is have a plan. Now, I know that may sound relatively simple, but it's always remarkable to me the number of people that say they want to be effective disciple makers, and yet they spend very little time planning out what they're going to do when they're spending time with people. In the previous segment, you heard me talk about a relationship I had with a man who was not a Christian. I had a plan, and virtually every time that we got together for lunch or to hang out, I would always have types of conversations that I'd want to bring up. Whenever I'm discipling someone, I always want to set a schedule. So for example, there was a group of young men at my church in Central Florida that all had a desire to be pastors. So we would set a schedule. We would say, hey, every other Sunday night, we're going to get together at my house. We're going to have dinner, hang out, we're going to talk. And I want you to come ready to discuss whatever the topic is going to be. Typically, I would email them the topic. I would have them read a particular blog or listen to a podcast or read a few chapters from a particular book, and then let them know, hey, when you get here, you're going to discuss this particular topic. Come ready to offer some quality insights from the readings to the conversation. That was the ideal. That was the schedule that I would set and the expectations that I would make clear to them. I remember when I was living in Central Florida, there was a young man in my congregation who was really wrestling through same-gender attraction. He loved Jesus and wanted to live for Jesus, but he was wrestling with his sexuality and his identity. And for years before he became a Christian, he had professed to be a gay man. As I began to sit down with him, I began to realize that he needed some very specific things in his life. So I set a plan. In fact, I went and got a book, and I said, you and I are going to go through this book together. We're going to read a chapter, and we're going to meet for coffee every Thursday morning. We're going to go through this particular book. And we would discuss how that applied to his own wrestle with his sexuality and with his identity. In fact, using books and curriculums are one of the most effective means to make disciples. The director of women's ministry at my local church here in Minnesota is currently taking a large group of women in our church through a workbook that she got from Lifeway that was written by Matt Chandler, a well-known pastor and author. There's also a young man in our congregation who is currently taking another group of people in our church through a particular book. It talks about all the different missionaries throughout church history, people that have made huge impacts. And he's specifically having conversations around how we can do the types of things they did. There are very effective means to use books and curriculums in our day. One of my favorite tools is a book called Multiply, which was written by Francis Chan and produced by his ministry. There's also an app that you can download for any smartphone. And in essence, what the book Multiply is, and similar to what the app is, are these different segments. Basically, you read something, the person you're discipling reads the same thing, and there's some questions that they are to ask. And you come together, and then there's some questions you ask together. So whenever I was using this book, Multiply, in discipling someone, we would read the chapters separately, we would read some of the questions individually, and then we would get together for coffee or for lunch, and over coffee or lunch, we would then ask the questions that were being outlined for us to ask together. It's really, really simple. If you've never discipled someone, go get the book Multiply or download the app. The app is free. Francis Chan had a heart to basically give a tool to people who wanted to disciple that didn't quite know how to make a plan to do it. He recognizes that making a plan, having a systematized approach and a schedule is extremely important, which is why he and his ministry team decided to develop the curriculum that you can get for free in the app. Another example I'd love to tell you about is a young lady by the name of Maddie. She was one of my volunteer leaders when I was a youth pastor at my church in Orlando, Florida. She had grown up in the church. She had grown up in Tennessee and had moved to Orlando, Florida to work for the mouse. That is Mickey Mouse. She was an employee in entertainment at Disney World. And she had grown up in a Christian home, but she had been relatively nominal most of her faith journey. She really didn't live for Jesus all that well, by her own admission. But one day she read a book called Not a Fan. Now, I've never read the book Not a Fan, so I can't endorse it. But she read it and she loved it. It revolutionized her life. She said it took her from being a nominal, typical American Christian to being someone who was truly sold out for Jesus. Apparently, the premise of the book is to basically inspire people to not just be fans of Jesus, rah, rah, cheer him on, but to actually be followers of Jesus, living life with Christ and allowing the truth of the gospel to govern and inform how you live your life. Well, Maddie read this book and it transformed her entire life upside down. And she regularly would buy the book and give it to people. Anytime she saw someone that she thought was nominal in their faith, she would say, hey, I think you should read this book. She would go buy it for them and give it away. And she had bought that book and given it away multiple times in her life. When she became a volunteer youth leader at our youth group, she kept telling me, Kenny, we've got to get our youth to read this book. It's the greatest book ever written. Don't you understand? She would get angry with me for not basically preaching every sermon ever from this particular book. And again, I still haven't read the book. Eventually I'll get around to reading it, I'm sure, but she was really, really passionate about this particular book. So I said to her, Maddie, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go find a bunch of young ladies in our youth group or in our church, and I want you to go up to them and tell them, hey, I like you. I want to be friends with you. I want to hang out with you more, and I think there's a book that you could learn a lot from. I would love to go through it with you. And I want you, Maddie, to go recruit some girls to go hang out with. And so Maddie did exactly that. She went to our church. She scoured our congregation and recruited about 8 or 9 young ladies, high school and college students, to meet with her at Panera Bread every Thursday morning before school to go through this book called Not a Fan. They would read a chapter, they would show up Panera Bread, and they would discuss it. And time after time, young ladies in our church would come up to me and say, that book has transformed my life. Maddie has taught me so much of what it means to not just be a fan of Jesus, but to be a genuine follower of Jesus. It's not that hard. Make a plan. Use a book. Use a curriculum. Use an app. Go to your pastor and say, I want to be a disciple maker. How do I do it? Teach me. I want to learn how to do certain things. I want to learn how to spread what I've learned. How do I take what's inside of me and pass it along to someone else? Now, if you're a pastor or church leader with people underneath of you longing to be disciple makers, I'd encourage you to do what I did with Maddie. Empower that person. Give them permission. Channel the energy and have them run with it. Give them the permission and the resources to run fast and furious in the direction of discipleship. I promise you, your ministry and your church will greatly benefit from people like that in your congregation. There are so many ways to disciple people, so many tools that are out there, podcasts and sermons, YouTube videos, books with workbooks and questions and small group guides and all sorts of different things out there. Quite frankly, there's really no reason for us to say, I don't know what to do when I'm discipling someone. If you're going to be an effective disciple maker, you have to have a plan. Go put a plan in place. And if you're a leader seeking to empower people to be great disciple makers, then you have to resource them, give them permission, and let them run wild. If we will do that, I promise we will be very, very effective in making disciples. In the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about giving people clear instructions and directions as we are discipling them.